You know, there ought to be a pop song called Weir's Way, because Tom Weir has been doing it Weir's Way for 70 years now. He's just turned 70, in fact. And more formally, he's been doing it Weir's Way on television for the past 10. A new career that made him Scottish Television Personality of the Year in 1978. He's an MBE, and he's just been elected president of the Scottish Mountaineering Club, a tremendous public accolade. But behind the public man, what is the private Weir like? What really is Weir's Way? What is it that's made the wee man with the nose, as I've heard him described, the way Weir is? Tom, let's start right at the beginning with the hatches. We'll go on to the matches and leave out the dispatches for this programme. Where did you come from?
Springburn. You know, that's the highest part of Glasgow, the locomotive empire of the world as it was in my youth and childhood. But you know, I didn't quite realise it. Strangely, I just took it for granted. But because it was a high place, I could see the hills in clear days. And I knew that's what I wanted to be.
But you were a tenement child, were you?
Oh yes, room and kitchen in Springburn, 310 Springburn Road. But there was a lot of ground around Springburn that was free then. You know, there's been a terrific lot of build-up of population and big houses where there used to be nothing.
What about your family? We all know that you've got a sister who's just as famous as you are, Molly Weir. Were there just the two of you?
No, I had a brother, Willie, still alive, lives in Robroyston.
And what sort of a childhood did you have? Was it what nowadays they'd call underprivileged? Were you poor?
I was unaware of it. You know, everybody around us was more or less the same. We all lived in room and kitchens, up tenement stairs with a common closet. We called it the cludgy. And, you know, 3 families shared the same toilet, 1 stair down. And we played playground games. In the summer, we went in our bare feet following the water carts because horses were commoner in Glasgow than motor cars. And in a hot summer, when the tar was coming out from the cobbles, you went in your bare feet and walked behind the cart. And then, if your feet were very tarry, you got it off with margarine. That was the way of things then.
What about your parents? What did they do?
Well, my father was killed in Gallipoli in 1916. My mother was a widow. And she was a wagon painter in Cowlaire's Works, you know, because it was done with a brush in these days. My earliest memories of my mother, she had beautiful red hair, was the paint marks in her face and her dungarees when she came in at night. My grandmother looked after us.
What about your school? What was your schooling like? Were you any good at school?
No. A very strange thing is that recently I was doing a programme with Jimmy Mack, and it was a phone-in programme. And I got a telephone call, and it really wasn't for a question. It was simply, if you remember your school teacher, Miss Nichol, ring Lindsay. And it was a phone number. So I rang this number, and I said, Miss Nichol? She said, yes. I said, this is Tom Weir here. She said, oh, how nice to talk to you. I said, well, I'm amazed that you remember me, and I'm even more amazed that you're still alive. Because she seemed to me to belong to the Ice Age.
Yeah, she was probably only about 20 at the time.
She told me she was the youngest teacher in the school. Yeah. I said, all I remember is that you had the sharpest knuckles in the business. You'd only got to look at me, and anything that was inside my head fled.
What did you like doing at school? Were you good at anything particular?
I wasn't aware of being good at anything, no. But I remember when I left school, I was one of the few boys that didn't get a leaving school certificate. I remember this tall teacher with a droopy moustache saying to me, don't you worry, Weir. You've got a talent that nobody in this class has. And I thought he was going to compliment me in playing the drum, because I reckon I was a pretty good drummer, the BB. He said, I'm going to hear of you one day as a writer. He said, you've got a talent, use it. That's the only compliment I ever had at school.
You must have left, what, 14 or 15 or something like that?
I left at 14, yes, 1929.
And started work at once, obviously?
Oh, yes. Well, whenever I could get a job, because it was the same kind of life as we've got now. There was a lot of unemployment, a great deal of hardship in these days. And you just trailed around until you got a job. I remember applying for a job in a firewood factory, 6 shillings a week. And the man would have taken me on, but he thought I was too good a type of boy. He told me so. My God, I was
Bet
coming
your
up in
mother
the
never
world.
said that.
And then, no, and then I applied for a job as an upholsterer with an old man who worked up a close in a room and kitchen. And I used to collect sweets from other closes, and he would upholster them, and I would take them back for £6 a week. But I left that to better myself at £7 a week, a job in Bishop Briggs in the Beechwood Bakery, delivering rolls and cakes, and they also had a fruit shop, so I delivered the fruit in the afternoon, and my hours of work were 7 in the morning till 6 at night, for which I get £7 a week. And then the big breakthrough, a job in the co-op as a grocer's boy, 13 and threepence a week, guaranteed until I was 16, and then because they had to pay insurance on you then, you were slung out unless you got a job behind the counter. I'll never forget coming back to the house and saying to my mother, I've got a job behind the counter. She said, oh, good Tommy, it's a job for life. My God, I felt a death knell. Born a man and died a grocer, you know. I'll never forget that.
Before we take you that far, what are your overriding memories of Springburn?
Oh, well, I started work really at 12 as a milk boy. And my overriding memory is the avalanche of men that poured down Springburn Road every morning at 7:30, answering the horns, we used to call them, because with Cowlairs Works, High Park Works, the Carry, and this group of horns that started shrieking meant that the men had 5 minutes or 10 minutes to get to their work. And as a milk boy, if your hands were full of milk cans, it wasn't bottles in these days, it was long-handled cans. You had to be off the street and be swept into High Park Works, whether you liked it or not.
Were you ever caught in the rush?
Oh yes, I had to duke up a close before now. And usually, you know, you were back in the house by 8 o'clock and then away to school for 9. But Springburn was a very lively place. It was almost a village in its own. You know, 27,000 people lived in Springburn, and they were all involved either in the building of locos, the servicing of them, or working in the co-op, because, you know, way back, I think it was in 1881, as I discovered later on, that the co-op was founded in order to eke out the small wages at that time, to sell the groceries cheap and get a dividend. And of course, folk lived on the dividend for their holidays and their luxuries.
You get this impression of this tremendously teeming community, great sense of community, but at the same time you were on the high ground where the tenements are now, and you could see beyond Springburn.
Oh yes. Well, the very strange thing is that in Springburn I was more aware of what lay outside Springburn than in Springburn, because on a clear day I could see these peaks. I didn't know what they were. But when there was no snow in the low ground, I could see the white of peaks away to the north. And I got to know that these peaks, away to the west, were the Arran Hills. You could see them on a clear day. Ben Lomond, flanked by the Kilpatricks on one side, the Campsies on the other, and a wee white peak just over the shoulder of Ben Lomond. That was Ben Louis. You could see Ben Achaber. And these were the hills I wanted to explore. I didn't know anybody who'd ever climbed them.
Why did you want to explore them?
I don't know.
Was it to escape, do you think?
Well, I didn't think of it in terms of escape, but what I did feel that the great world was waiting out there. And somehow in my heart, I knew that Springburn wasn't for me. And I used to read books about exploration and adventure. And as a small boy, my dream was to have a wee hut somewhere in the country where I would trap rabbits and live alone in this wee hut, surrounded by rivers, lochs, mountains, and so on.
When you say a small boy, do you mean in height or in years? Because you must have been a titch at school all the time.
I was always one of the 3 or 4 small boys in the school, yes, in my class, that is.
Did that bother you?
No, it didn't bother me particularly, but I'd like to have been a bigger boy. You know, the result was I used to do a great deal of exercises, and from the age of 14, I was a health and strength fanatic, you know.
Well, try to be Atlas.
Weightlifting, clinging on bars, wrestling, catch-as-can wrestling, boxing. I used to go out cross-country running, slept with my hands below the blankets, you know. I was really keen.
Below the blankets?
Yes, above the blankets.
Yes.
I was very, very keen to be a a mighty man, but I never really grew. I just had to make do with what was going. But the Weirs are a wee family. My sister's small, my brother's small. So I think I was trying to achieve the impossible.
Becoming a big man.
Yes.
But when a lot of little people or short people do become big men because they become more determined to make a mark.
Yes, well, the quality of determination is really in our family, you know. I mean, look, my sister, she was a tremendous swot at school, you know.
Was she?
Oh, God, aye. Her head was never out of books, you know, an hour at this, an hour at that, an hour at the next thing. She was the dux of the school. When she went to college, she was the gold medalist. And in fact, at school, I get fed up hearing teachers say to me, "Oh, you're not like your sister," you know.
She went to college, did she?
She went to Skerries College, yes. She became a secretary, you know. She became, indeed, the fastest shorthand writer in the world.
How fast was that?
Well, it was 300 words a minute at that time.
That's pretty quick.
There isn't the same demand for it now because of audio and all that, but, she's still a very good shorthand writer.
Did you ever take up shorthand?
Yes, she taught me for 2 and 6 a lesson. She said it was the only way she could guarantee I would work. And she actually achieved it too, because I became quite a good shorthand writer, although I don't think I could write it today.
So you had the example of your sister as something to emulate, of doing well. What did you want to do, apart from the sort of schoolboy dream of being an explorer, living in your hut in the wilderness? What were your ambitions?
Well, first of all, it was to be a drummer, because I was so keen on the drum, you know. My brother joined the... You know, in these early days, it was hard to get into the BB. There were so many boys wanting to get in. And the hall only held 120 boys, so there was a queue to get in. And when my brother joined, he's 2 years older than me, he came home with the sticks, you know, and he was practicing the mammy daddy, you know, the paradiddle and all these things. And I would say, "How do you do that?" And he would show me. But Willie wasn't very persistent. The result was that I could do the rolls and so on before he could. And he reported to the BB that his brother was a rare wee drummer. So I get in a year before I was really due to get in. And I became, in time, the leading drummer in the BB band. So I was oriented in the drums, especially as I knew a chap called Tommy Nielsen. He was a member of a concert party. He was a grocer. He was a real comedian, a tremendous twist in his eye. And he really made use of this twist, you know, because he could turn any joke against himself. I remember a wee story he used to tell. He's sitting at his breakfast with his wife, and the waiter comes and he says, "Bring me 2 boiled eggs." And they have a terrific fight. He shoots his wife and he shouts for the waiter. He said, "Make it 1 egg." You know? That kind of stuff. Anyway, Tommy, he was a rare drummer, but he was self-taught, and he could play the concertina, a marvellous concertina player. And he used to play the concertina, and I used to play the drums, his drums.
Was this as a sort of semi-professional gig?
No, this was in his house on a Tuesday afternoon when he got his half day.
But did you ever use it professionally?
Ah, yes, I did, but that was in time, because Tommy used to take on engagements, and I used to deputise for him on the drums. And then I had 2 or 3 pals who were fairly able musicians, and I formed a wee band called the Swing Stars. And we really made a lot of money. I bought a set of drums in the hire purchase. Indeed, it was that wee band that launched my sister in her theatrical career.
How?
Well, I'll tell you, we bought a microphone because we had a singer. He was a rotten singer, but we thought he was good. It was the age of crooning, you know, and he used to drool over the microphone. And we were testing it out, and my sister happened to be there. And I said, "Look, try this microphone. I want to hear it." She did some impersonations, and they were so good, you know, they were amazingly good. And Carol Levis was in Glasgow looking for discoveries.
Oh, the discoveries.
Yes, you should go in. And she won it. And that really launched her on what was her career.
I hope you charged her agent's fees after charging her 2 and 6 for shorthand.
I don't think you could screw that out of her. That would be unscrewing the inscrutable.
Well, apart from your drumming, what other ambitions?
Well, you see, I was quite happy playing the drums, but I was also a very keen cyclist. I maybe didn't mention that, but I used to cycle a great deal. I bought this bike, And on Tuesday afternoons, you know, I would go away out with other chaps I knew who were keen cyclists. And we'd do enormous mileages, you know, 80 miles was nothing on the bike on a Tuesday afternoon. And I might have even been a racing cyclist. I'd ambitions towards being a racing cyclist, but unfortunately I was hit by a motorcycle one day and I finished up with a broken collarbone. I wakened up in the Glasgow infirmary. I was also boxing at that time. I used to box in Premier Land, you know, on a Friday night in Bridgeton. I even fought into the final for my own weight in Scotland. And with a broken collarbone, I couldn't box, I couldn't cycle, my mother wouldn't hear tell of another bike. So on a Sunday morning, I used to go away out Bishop Briggs and walk over the hills above Torrens, over the Campsies to the toll house, climb a few hills and come back again. And then I had the great idea that I wanted to be a writer because I'd discovered the thing that I really liked doing. Walking, seeing the country, talking to people, and I started to write short stories, mainly centred around people I met. I wrote a short story centred on the life of a tramp and various other things like that. And I thought, no, it'd be marvellous to be a photographer, you know, I had a great notion to be a photographer. And at that time, if you bought the bulletin for a month, you got a box camera. So I bought the bulletin for a month and got the box camera. And
this was the old box brownie, wasn't it?
Yes, it was a wee
Marked
box.
cloudy and fair.
That's right.
Idiot-proof it was.
Right. So I had this wee camera, and I was writing short stories, not very successful stuff at all. I mean, I tried them in the newspapers, but I wasn't getting any success. And exploration, I was reading books about the climbing of Everest. You know, 1924 was the first Everest expedition, and I was full of this stuff, and I thought it'd be marvellous to be a climber, you know, and I used to go to the campsite and climb in the crags. Little did I know that the climbs I was doing were suicidal because the rocks so rotten. It was only years later when I came to do them as an experienced climber that I realised how dangerous they were.
Fools rush in, eh?
Yes. Anyway, I thought, I would like to be a writer. I'd like to be a climber. I'd like to be a photographer. And I used to see wee adverts in the papers. Pelmanism, let me be your father. The science of success.
Oh, the grasshopper mind thing.
Yes.
Yes. Have you got a grasshopper mind? Try Pelmanism.
Right.
It was to teach you to concentrate. Your
So-
sister did Pitman, you did Pelman.
I did Pelman, and it cost me 8 guineas on the Never Never. I paid a pound a month, I think. Something like that, or a guinea a month. And it did me a terrific lot of good because it focused my mind on the absolute necessity of working towards my ambition. So I took a class on the art of writing at the university. I gave up the dance band. I sold my drums to an unemployed man on the hire purchase. He paid me as he was paid for the drumming. He took over my place in the band. And then with the camera, I took pictures and I got some of them in the papers. And I bought a better camera called a Zeiss Ideal. And in climbing, you know, I was gradually extending my travels because being small, I could get half fare in the bus. And on the train, I could go to Aracher for 2 and 6. And in the summer, there were excursion trains to Fort William, 6 shillings return. Now, that was too far to get a day's climbing, but I could go to Bridge of Orchy for 2 and 3pence and climb Bendoran, the Cree and Larrick Hills, and so on.
So this was all your social life,
That was my-
become travelling, climbing. Why did you want to climb? Just to get to the top?
Ah, well, no more than just to get to the top. That great unexplored world was opening up all the time. The joy of the mountain tops, and also what you learned from your climbing. Also the people that you met. You see, this period of the early 30s was really the beginning of the working class outdoor revolution. We were the first generation of working class people to find the great outdoors, and many of the men were unemployed. Indeed, I met politics for the first time in my life because many of the men were looking at what had happened in Russia I mean, remember, it's the 30s. The Russian Revolution, as you know, was just before the 1920s. And they had seen the first 5-year plan. And they were looking at Britain as a rotten country, full of money everywhere, but all being ploughed into abroad, and all the things that should be done in this country weren't being done. And it was a great time of socialistic thinking, you know, the time of John Maclean and Jimmy Maxton and so on. And many of them were die-hard communists, you know. Many of them went to the Spanish War. 1 or 2 of them died there.
What about the kind of friendships you developed from this intense period of growing up round the fire, as it were?
Well, my first real friend was with an unemployed plumber called Richie Wallace, and he was a real wild man. Oh, he was an extremist if ever there was one. And I formed a friendship with him. And these days, if you were on the dole, you know, you get a fortnight's holidays in the summertime. And I went away for a holiday with him. I was working in the co-op. I took my holidays to coincide with his. And we did a walk beginning at Tainault. We walked up the length of Loch Etive, over the Devil's Staircase to Ben Nevis, over the top of Nevis, down Glen Nevis, across Rannoch Moor, back to Loch Lomond, carrying a mighty bag all the way. You know, it was my mother said I looked like a greyhound when I came back. It was a real tough upbringing. And Richie, as I tell you, he was a wild man. He had a savage temper. I remember this night we were in a bothy. And we're always hungry, you know, we never had enough food. And Richie always poured the condensed milk, you know, with a wee tin of condensed milk, a hole at each end. You put a matchstick in when you were carrying it. He would remove the matchsticks and pour it into the tea, pour it into mine. And then he always licked the spot where it had come out, you see. And I always envied him that. And one day I beat him to it. And I got the tin, you see, I poured it in, and I licked the tin. He told me off for dirty habits.
Life isn't fair.
Yes, well, he was one. And then I met another chap. I met him on the Arachar Hills one day, a chap called John McNair. And I envied him. He was a fireman. He was a Maryhill man who'd become a fireman in the railway. And he'd got a job at Arachar. He was a cleaner and assistant driver at times at Arachar. And we went to Skye together. We had a great trip away up to Torridon. John seemed to me to have the wisdom of the ages. He was 26 when I was 16. And although he was a great chap, I mean, I only saw him occasionally, but the real man I met was on a train. I happened to be going up north one day for a day on this excursion train. I was going to Tyndrum to climb Ben Louis. And there was a big red-headed chap sitting in the corner. There was a few passengers in the train, but they all got out at a certain point until there was only this chap and myself left. And then we got talking, and he told me he was out for the weekend, that he had Monday off, and he was going to climb Ben Louis and camp in Glenconinish. And when I was green with envy, he said, well, I've got a couple of blankets, he said, and bags of grub. He was a butcher. He said, I've got bags of grub. He said, if you could get a message back to your mother, he said, we could camp up there. We'll climb. I said, great. I found a man, you know, Springman's a place we can always find a locomotive man. And I found somebody who would take a message to my mother. I get hell when I get back, but that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship with a man who did me more good than any other.
Let me take you through the co-op now, with all the prospects of dying a grocer, as you say. When did you feel you'd done enough learning through Pelmanism to become a writer and a naturalist and a mountaineer and give up being a grocer?
Well, I don't know that was a value judgment in that sense. I knew that I wanted to be a writer, but really what precipitated my departure from the grocery trade was my hatred of the boss. I disliked him intensely. I didn't like the job either. But this particular day, I remember, I was working at the ham machine. I was what's called the ham man. You know, people were working away and shout, half pound of pork sausages, half pound of Ayrshire bacon. You know, and I would do the stuff and pass it along. And I was always very popular with the kids for some reason or another. And this day there was a wee boy holding down the other side of the scales. I mean, they weren't balanced scales like we get now with, you know, moving fingers and electronic digits. And these days it was a simple pan with weights and a glass plate. And this wee boy was holding down the far end of the scale and I couldn't weigh it. And I waved the hand machine at him. And here did the whole set of scales not get caught up in the boy's hands, and he pulled them to the floor. And the boss, with his big rubbery face showing every sign of absolute detestation of me, started telling me off. I said, if you've anything to say to me, say it in the back shop. And I walked into the back shop, and as he was talking, I was taking off my jacket. And I threw my white coat down, put on my jacket, and walked out.
Tom, you're now an established author. You've got countless articles, umpteen books to your credit. How did the actual publication literary work start?
Well, I think when I went to the university class, art of writing class, I'd already been writing quite a number of things. And Matt, my great friend whom I met in the train, had already written quite a number of articles for publications, which he shyly showed me. He kept them under his hat. And of course, I was very keen to aspire to the same kind of market. Now, the market Matt was aiming at were wee pieces that used to be in the Evening Times and the Evening Citizen and the Bulletin. And they were just little vignettes, and these were the things that I was trying to write. But, you know, I kept sending them in, and they kept landing with a dull thud in the lobby. And then one day, one appeared in the Evening Citizen. Oh, I could hardly stop reading it. Tiny wee piece signed T.W. It was War and Peace for me, you know, the big takeoff. And, you know, funnily enough, I started to get stuff accepted, you know.
But what was that first piece about?
It was really a wee incident about a hare and a fox in a built-up area in Glasgow. And it was just a little incident. I quickly discovered that the things that people liked to read were incidents rather than kind of treatises on anything. So I think I had the elements of a storyteller, but I was just trying to find out how to do it. And the art of writing class really led me to short story writing. And I had quite a few short stories accepted. And then gradually I started to look around and tailor my stuff to the market. And I think that was really the basis of success, because as you know, there's no use writing 2,000 words if every week the piece that appears in the paper is 600 words or 400 words. And that was really the takeoff, and gradually it became more ambitious from then on.
And what about the photography? Because really, you earned your living as a photojournalist for a long time. Mm-hmm. How did the photography start, professionally speaking?
Well, this box camera, which I bought to begin with, was, you know, just a thing you pointed and shot, no focusing device on it. But I was very encouraged by some of the pictures I was taking. And I bought another camera called a Zeiss Ideal. It was a plate camera which took film pack. You never see film pack now. But anyway, this had a film pack, double extension, and my idea was to take natural history pictures, because I was going to try to get the stuff that Seton Gordon and Eric Hosking, who was my wildlife hero, try to get pictures like them. And with that double extension camera, the Zeiss Ideal, I sent in a picture I'd taken of a tree creeper to Zoo magazine, and here did it win the first prize. And the man who chose it was Eric Hosking. And I only found out that later when I met him. I was actually having my last 4 days before joining the army, and I came down off the Cairngorms. And I met Hosking just coming back after being 6 hours in a hide trying to photograph a merlin. And we got talking, and I confessed that I had aspirations to be a wildlife photographer. And I said, in fact, I actually won a competition. He said, oh, what was that? And I told him the tree creeper in Zoo magazine. He said, I chose the picture. Isn't that an interesting thing?
There's a coincidence.
Aye. Well, from there, you know, I was developing and printing my own pictures at that time. And I began to see that the picture with the most impact was one which had a storyline to it. And I started to take pictures. And when you start taking pictures with good storylines, you start to get them in the papers. And the Glasgow Herald put quite a number of my pictures in their window in Buchanan Street. And the result was that I was actually, you get 10.6 a picture in these days.
And you kept going home via Buchanan Street.
Yes, and I joined the Glasgow YMCA Camera Club. And the dark room was in the basement. Oh, it was as hot as hell, literally, down there. And I used to get my white jacket on and do this stuff, you know. And I really had a great run of success in my own way. And I came to believe that the marriage of the word and the picture was my forte. And indeed, without that marriage, I don't think I would ever really have made the grade as a writer.
Of course, the stage after that is the movement from a still photograph to the moving photograph. How did you make that move into taking movies?
Well, you know, I wouldn't have thought of that, but for a chap in Glasgow who had a sweetie factory in Glasgow, Buchanan's Sweetie Works, and Mr. Buchanan, who was a great reader of my stuff, said to me, I can't remember if he wrote to me or said it in person because I'd met him once or twice, he said, you should buy a cine camera and you should make films of the kind of things that you do in stills and words. I bought the camera. I took, you know, 100-foot rolls of film. It was a Bolex. It was a reflex Bolex camera with a turret lens. And I started to sell these films almost at once. They were mainly of a newsy character. You know how they were looking for fill-in stuff in these early days because news, there were only one camera team in STV at the time, for example.
What are the early films that you remember?
Well, almost the first film I made was of a flight to Dounreay. I was giving a lecture there, and 5 men had died on Jock's Road. They died of exposure in a big blizzard. And it so happens my visit to Dounreay was just after that big storm. And I got the plane from Edinburgh because the Glasgow airport was closed. And I was the only person in the plane. And the pilot who saw my camera said to me, would you like some shots? I said, yes. I said, I wouldn't mind. And as we came, we were into the cold, clear air once we left Edinburgh, and he swung right over Jock's Road, and you could see the drifts that had killed these men.
Can I just mention the word Loch Lomond?
Yes. Ah, yes, Loch Lomond. You know, I've shot a lot of stuff there, of course, because you've probably seen it on the TV, but I actually did begin making films on Loch Lomond because it was close at hand. And what I was interested in was the wildlife scene, because being a naturalist, I was keen to portray the seasons. And I did try to make a film on the wildlife of Loch Lomond. And although I say it myself, I think it's a jolly nice wee film. That was in colour. But the first films I shot were in black and white. And then I became more ambitious. I decided with another photographer, Alf Gregory, who carried the highest camp in Mount Everest. He was very keen in cine work too. And we agreed that we should go to Morocco because both of us had been there as climbers, but not together, that we should do a trip across the high Atlas. Now, these mountains extend for 1,500 miles, and the highest peaks are just under 14,000 feet. And living amongst the mountains are these marvellous Berber people. Berber comes from barbarian. And on the Atlantic coast, there's a very different type of Berber. On the desert, there's another kind of Berber. So what we wanted to do was to do the transition from the sea right over the Atlas down to the desert. And I must say that was a great experience. We shot 5,000 feet of film, and I sold part of that film to the BBC. It was shown in the People of Many Lands series. We made it in colour, but it was shown in black and white. And then in Glencoe, of course, I wanted to show some of the climbing stars of the day. So I filmed some quite hair-raising climbs in Glencoe. And then in Greenland, I had the good fortune to be chosen for an expedition with Sir John Hunt to northeast Greenland at latitude 72. So I was really seeing a kind of Scotland of the Ice Age. And that was a marvellous trip, and I got a very nice film out of that too.
Did you enjoy operating the camera?
Yes, I did. I enjoyed operating the camera, but I'll tell you what I didn't enjoy, all the hard work that's involved in making a film, because you've really got to give it your whole mind. You know, if you're making a film, you shouldn't be doing anything else. It's hard to do it and be a climber and a naturalist at the same time, but you've got to think about continuity and changing the angles, and you have an awful lot of work to do on the technical side. And then when you get back, all this business of editing.
What kind of parts of the world did you go to that really stick in the memory?
Oh, well, I'll never forget the first trip, because you see, I'd been in my period in the 30s when I wanted to be an explorer. I'd been reading about the exploration of the Rishi Gorge by Shipton and Tillman and the climbing of Nanda Devi. And this, you know, this great Rishi Gorge had never been penetrated until Shipton and Tillman penetrated it. So in 1950, we launched a little expedition. 4 men from Glasgow, Douglas Scott and myself were the original 2. We were going to go, just the pair of us. And then we get Bill Murray, you know, W.H. Murray, the climber, and Tom McKinnon from Mulgai, who subsequently played a part in the climbing of Kanchenjunga. The 4 of us went in 1950, and that was the very first post-war British Himalayan expedition. And that's a trip I'll never forget, you know, to penetrate the Rishi Gorge, climb some of the unclimbed peaks in that region, explore right away up to the Tibet border, and then come back in an entirely different route. We actually came back in a route that had only been traversed once before by any European. And then the following year I went to the Arctic for the summer. And indeed I was supposed to be going with a big United Services expedition to Queen Louise Land in Greenland. I'd been invited to go as a photographer. But suddenly, some of the things I'd been doing during the time I'd been exploring started to come up, things I'd written. I mean, my money was starting to go down. I was getting a bit worried. And then suddenly, a thing I'd written about the trip to India called High Adventure in the Himalaya, I sold it for $2,500 to the National Geographic magazine. £889 in British money at that time, 1952. And then a book I'd written came up at the same time. And I then had as much money as I'd had after 4 years working in the survey. So the sky was the limit. And by a great stroke of luck, because Bill Murray had been in the reconnaissance of Everest with Shipton, that was the finding of the route for the climbing of the mountain in 1953. And on the way back from that expedition, Hillary, who'd been in that trip, had seen this great gorge, the Roll-Walling Gorge, with unexplored mountains on each side of it. And we were there before Everest was climbed. Again, Tom McKinnon, Douglas Scott, me, but a different 4th member this time, George Roger. So we were amongst the very first travellers into unexplored Nepal. I'll never look back upon that with anything but a tremendous sense of thanksgiving to have seen a part of the world completely unaltered since the beginning of time, occupied by just a handful of some of the most resourceful men in the world, the Sherpas.
And what, looking back over your travels, would you say was your best ever trip?
Well, I've no hesitation in saying that the trip I did in 1957 to the mountains of Kurdistan was the best value for my income tax I've ever had, because it was so notoriously hard to get into. And I wrote to Selwyn Lloyd, and I heard nothing for months. And I was about to go somewhere else when suddenly I got a letter saying permission granted to explore the mountains of Kurdistan for 6 weeks. Permission for myself and Douglas Scott, with whom, of course, I've been in many an expedition. And the 2 of us set out. We took the Oriental Express to Istanbul. We travelled overland by bus, train and boat to the old town of Van. And it's been called the cradle of civilization because Van became the first Christian state in the world. That's Armenia. And these are the mountains the disciples came through. And it stands in the junction between Syria, Iraq, Persia, Iran we call it today, and Turkey. And the mountain land, mountains as fine as any in the Dolomites, as inspiring as the Himalaya, and only inhabited by these Kurdish men, a tribe that's never been defeated in war. Xenophon's army were driven out by them, and we were told we'd probably be robbed by them. But we got on great with them. We just told them we were Kurds from Scotland as best we could. We didn't speak the language. We just did did as best we could. We took a couple of Kurdish men that we picked up, 4 horses, and we explored the mountains of the Jilo and the Satdak and made quite a number of first ascents, and we had many close encounters with Syrian bears, which are everywhere in these mountains. One very frightening one when a bear charged us, but luckily it swerved away from us when it was almost on top of us.
Of the galaxy, the pantheon of mountaineers that you must be familiar with, who are the ones that stand out in your mind?
I think Tom Patey is one that stands out particularly, because when I came back from the Himalaya in 1952, Tom became a very good friend of mine. I did a lot of climbing with him, and he had an inspiring effect on me. Although he was only a university student, he had the ability, because of his own ability, to draw out something from you. And for me, it's something that I didn't know I had. I found myself climbing harder with Tom than I've ever done in my life. And indeed, Tom did his last real climb with me in Applecross on the Ciach of Sgurna Hurricane, and 3 days later he was dead. He died by falling off a sea stack. As you know, Tom was one of those who made the very first ascent of the Old Man of Hoy. And I think the world has seen him swinging about there. He was a wonderful man. He was not only a great climber, but he was a great musician. You know, he played the box, he told stories, he could enthuse any company. And then, of course, at the opposite end of the scheme, you've got Dougal Haston. Dougal was more of a man of the killer instinct. A man, very cold eyes, austere, an iconoclast. You didn't really feel that he liked anybody very much, but he could drive himself to the very edge, as he showed climbing Everest the hard way, climbing the north face of the Eiger in winter. And yet he died by obeying one of the fundamental laws of nature, skiing down a slope after new snow had fallen and there was an avalanche danger, and notices had been put up, avalanche danger. And he was avalanched and died in it. A remarkable man.
But mountaineers are always gambling their lives, aren't they?
Modern climbers tend to do so more than old-fashioned ones, because, you know, to make breakthroughs today, you've got to push so hard. And look at Hamish McInnes. No man has stuck out his neck more than Hamish McInnes, the cunning old fox of Glencoe, hero of 100 rescues and more. Hamish has been everywhere. He and John Cunningham of the Craig Dew set out to climb Everest after the British team failed on it, because they knew there were bags of junk lying about the mountain and stores of food that they could eat. They tried to climb Pommery and their only food was a turnip. And they carried their own bags. Total cost £18 for a trip to the Himalaya. How's that? Hamish is a remarkable fellow. The way he's preserved his enthusiasm, and of course physically such a strong man, a powerful climber with a powerful imagination. He'll go a long way yet.
How much have you yourself allowed yourself to become involved in what one might call the politics of nature and nature conservancy and national parks and this kind of thing? Quite apart from being somebody who enjoys it, have you also wanted to do something positive to ensure that other people can as well?
Well, I've tried. You know, I was a member of the Countryside in 1970, Study Group 9, which was going to look at the future of our countryside. And that was the committee that set up the Countryside Commission for Scotland. But I can't say I think it's been a success, because the Countryside Commission for Scotland has got no executive power. It's an inspirational body rather than a practical body.
But inspiration is sometimes a very good thing.
Very good thing, but without teeth, such a body is being defeated, and it's been defeated all the time. They're not even able to protect places that vitally need protection. Look at Loch Lomond, the driving of that substandard road up the priceless Craigroyston shore. Well, there's no point in being het up over that now. The road is made. Pardon me, there's 1,000 miles of substandard roads in the Cairngorms, built by bulldozers, creating erosion all the time, and there's no way we can stop them. Everywhere the Economic Forestry Group and other groups are planting Sitka spruce for the sake of the tax advantage, not because it's good for the country. So in a way I feel a sense of defeat, in how the countryside is going. There are many disparate bodies, but all the time the country is being eroded more and more. We talk about conservation, but we're not practicing it.
But in a way, Tom, it's ironic that you yourself might be one of the guilty factors in this, because by making the countryside and the idea of nature so alluring, so attractive, you're encouraging a greater and greater numbers of people to go out there, and the greatest danger to the environment is people.
No, that's not so. The greatest protection of the environment is from the number of people who will go out there determined to save it.
But aren't there vast areas of the Highlands which will only be destroyed by the tramp of feet?
No, very few will only be destroyed by the tramp of feet. We know fine that the biggest saving grace in Scotland is that there is still a big amount of wild country relative to the rest of Britain. And I think if we can keep some of these pieces of country accessible only to people who are prepared to work for them, in other words, pay the price of wet feet, being tired. You've got to walk in there, and you must have a buffer zone which has got to be entered. A friend of mine put it more crudely. He said, you know, we were at a road end in a wee glen with a road just up to the top and back, and car after car passed us. We were actually drumming up at the time over a wee fire making tea, and within 20 minutes they were going back down the glen. He said, you know, the best thing that could happen here is to pay a toll on this road. He said, and the toll I would like to see would be a 10-foot man with a heavy boot who would deliver a solid kick where it hurts most, and if you're prepared to pay the price to get up the glen. So I believe that to preserve the best of Scotland, it mustn't be made too easy. One of the easy ways to protect anywhere is to just leave a big wet bit where you need a pair of boots or a pair of Wellingtons to get through.
Are there places in Scotland which are your particular favourites, which you don't write about in your many writings?
Yes, quite a few. But you see, there is a constant threat to them too, because we sell Scotland to the highest bidder. That's the reason why Arabs, Belgians and Dutchmen and various other folk buy it up. They don't do that in Norway. They don't do that in Iceland either. That I find is something which I'll never agree with.
So at your 70th year, are you depressed about the future?
Well, no, I'm not depressed about the future, because I think, you know, in order to have a future, you've got to have a past. And the past has shown us how we can devastate an area. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about conservation now if we hadn't spoiled what there was there earlier. And we see what the damage we've done in the past. And people are beginning to see with the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which of course has so many loopholes in it, that the cunning, the clever people are evading the issue by destroying, because of the 3 months period, they're destroying within the 3 months the pasture with the rare flowers before the Nature Conservancy or whatever can save it. And people are beginning to see that there is a way forward. The agriculture, man and nature must learn to coexist, and it can only be done by having the right kind of mechanism for it. We'll get that mechanism. I don't feel depressed about the future, not if we don't have some nuclear winter or something like that. We all must feel a certain depression over that.
But Tom, now that you've come to this milestone, the natural span, 3 years, 70, is there anything left undone that you regret about your first 70 years?
Well, I can't really say that I've got any regrets at all. I'm rather grateful for the fact that because of the kind of background I had to really work quite hard for it. I was never blasé. I was always very grateful for turning another page. And I still have the same curiosity today that I had when I was young. And I still think the world is a most marvellous, delightful place. I don't want to live too long. I just want to live long enough to be able to enjoy all the things I enjoy with enough mobility not to have to depend on anybody else. And the day I can't do that, I would just love to drop dead.
Well, long before you do that, as a belated birthday tribute, I found a poem by one of the mountaineers you mentioned earlier, Geoffrey Winthrop Young, which I think sums up very beautifully the kind of feeling that mountaineers have for their mountains. And I'd just like to read you the last 6 lines. What if I live no more, those kingly days? Their night sleeps with me still. I dream my feet upon the starry ways, my heart rests in the hill. I may not grudge the little left undone. I hold the heights, I keep the dreams I won. Tom Weir, thank you very much.